Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Smokey and the Bandit from 1977. Now, Smokey and the Bandit is a cult classic, I guess. It's a movie that lots of people know or have made reference to, but I don't know how many people have actually watched it. It was apparently very popular when it released, to the point that it was the second highest grossing film in 1977, right after Star Wars. It's a bizarre movie that it's just got a lot going on. It does too much and not nearly enough all at once. And is the history behind this movie is possibly more interesting than the movie itself. I'm going to go ahead and lead with saying I didn't mind watching this movie. It was pretty, carefree, goofy comedy, and did not offer me much, but I wasn't asking for much. So in a general sense, this movie's fine. And it's, I'm not going to say it holds up well, but it's entertaining, and I was about to say inoffensive, but that's exactly the wrong word. It's got some offensive stuff in it, but it is entertainment-wise an inoffensive. It doesn't make you think too much, and that's fine. So 1977, Burt Reynolds and Sally Field, and some other people as well, and the directorial debut of Hal Needham, who is a very substantial figure in the stunt movie space. I just made a connection in my brain that I'm not sure I should be made. Well, it is very valid, but I'm a little hesitant to say it out loud. This is the same as what's it called? John Wick. This is stunt person decides to be a director and show off what they can do, as somebody who knows the stunts better than they do the rest of the movie. That doesn't mean I'm saying that the two should be compared. I'm just saying it's the same kind of idea being put forth here. And given the difference between stunt work, in the last 10 years and 50 years ago, I think that's even more notable for the time. However, this movie is real thin, and I didn't know until reading about it later, but apparently it was almost entirely improvised. This was and is a movie that is mostly, the content of the movie is mostly down to car chases, car crashes, stunt jumps, and various physical altercations. It has a lot of stuff that is in certain ways reminiscent of the sort of slapstick comedies of the 30s and 40s. And as far as like impressive stunts, there's a lot more that's just general wanton destruction and people driving into ditches and shit than actual impressive, like flashy, I should say, not impressive, flashy stunt work going on in this movie. There's a lot to not, there's a lot to not talk about in this film, because of all the things that it lacks. It lacks much real characterization. It lacks much of a plot. It lacks any real seriousness, although occasionally it seems to take itself seriously more than it ought to. And it's definitely more of a stunt show than it is a movie. Um, and at the time, I believe Sally Field was still kind of a small actor. Like, didn't have a lot of huge roles under her belt at the time. Burt Reynolds, I believe, was pretty much an icon by this point. Although I think this movie ended up catapulting him further into sort of stardom. I like Sally Field. I think she's a talented actor. Burt Reynolds. I like watching Burt Reynolds, but he only plays Burt Reynolds. He's not a real. He's not much of an actor. There are a couple of other performances in this film though that are pretty excellent and over the top. Like Jerry Reed as Snowman is entertaining in his own right. Jackie Gleason and Paul Williams and like a couple of other like there's just a bunch of good. I don't know if I would say they're necessarily good actors, but they're putting on good performances and fit the rest of the story and the characterization they need to have really well. There's a lot of side minor characters who either who have lines, but I think most of them have no names, because the majority of this film, the plot is very thin, and it's just they're driving across the country and they are having CB radio conversations with a bunch of people. And so a lot of the people they hear from as they pass through are these people who have like one scene, and they're kind of great. A bunch of them are really good. They're really entertaining performances. They're not like great acting or anything, but for a movie that is struggling so much to find a plot or seems to be sort of just bobbing at the surface of acceptability in terms of keeping a tone up and an adequate pacing to deal with the ups and downs of the action scenes that they can't just have all the time. Although, if you want to start talking about other films that do that, anyway, that's a digression for another time. These sort of interludes of people they meet along the way and people who help them out are pretty entertaining, and I think deserve their own credit for those performances. Not all of them are like fantastic, but they're really entertaining. And the fact that I now know that so much of this was improvised means like it's kind of all the more impressive. In fact, apparently one of the major scenes near the end of the film, the footage was just completely lost, and so they just reshot it completely. This scene with like a car collectors club or drivers club, just completely lost the footage and redid it, and the whole thing was done for like $4.3 million, I think, which admittedly in 1977 money is a lot more, but it's still like relative to the box office that it pulled, which is allegedly about 300 million. That's pretty darn impressive. But the plot is both doing not nearly enough and way too much at the same time. The point of this movie is not to watch it for the plot, so I'm just gonna spoil it, and I promise you it's not spoiling anything. There are several subplots going on all at once. The main one is that Burt Reynolds, who plays Bandit, is this like notorious driver who is hired to smuggle beer into Georgia for reasons that are not really illuminated in the film, but it turns out it's because apparently at the time in 1977, Coors couldn't be had in most of the eastern part of the United States because it didn't have preservatives in it, and it would go bad. And so they just by the time it made it like that far away from Denver. So and refrigeration trucks are a whole other discussion, but apparently, so the plot is just he gets hired to smuggle this beer at high speed. The secondary plot that shows up is that Sally Field's character is this runaway bride from what appears to be sort of like a forced marriage to the like idiot son of a local Texas sheriff who's like just losing his goddamn mind all the time. And that's the majority of the content of the film itself, is that second plot, even though the first plot is the whole impetus for the reason they're doing it at all. You could cut out either one of these two things. You could even cut out the truck driving from this. And I'm not sure necessarily why they chose to include all the things they did, because I think they could have reduced it and cut it down and made it a little bit more streamlined and efficient, but they also probably would have lost some of the content. This movie needs all the content it can get. It needed Sally Field probably because they just needed to fill time and have a little bit of romantic appeal for the people who are looking for that. And it needed the truck driving because there's a couple more scenes that can't really happen without truck driving, and just a series of police car chases is a little bit thin, a little bit too thin as a plot all on its own. But given that this is like framed as a truck film, but then Burt Reynolds does not drive a truck, he's driving this blocking car, really means that you could like cut a bunch of different parts of this film and still have a working plot. You could cut whole plot lines. You could cut the whole, that's the thing, right? They're being chased for two reasons. And at no point during the movie does Burt Reynolds actually find out that he's being chased by this rogue sheriff because the woman in the car has run away from the sheriff's son. Like, I don't think they at any point reveal that to him. He's just like, there's extra cops today because they're smuggling the beer. And it's just like either one of those two plots would have been fine on its own. You didn't really need both. But again, the whole thing's already very thin. The production quality on this film varies dramatically from perfectly acceptable to like an absolute editing disaster. There's tons of inconsistencies in the film, no surprise there. There's tons of just like major gaping plot holes, but even more so just the like the shot to shot and scene to scene editing, and the amount of like just sloppy ADR or like pickup shots or weird stuff just doesn't look like a super professional production, or at least it wouldn't if not for the fact that like the stuff that's actually going on screen looks like it's probably at least a little bit expensive. This wasn't, some student hack film or something like that. So and like I said at the beginning, a lot of the sort of car racing scenes and chase scenes and crash scenes are not the most compelling, and admittedly I don't have a huge number of comparisons to make for this genre in this time, but there's a couple of movies I may pick up that are sort of in my thought process that I may look at soon that may be sort of decent comparisons. Anyway, my point being that just the movie is real fast and loose with plot and editing and the the recording quality and all these other things. It does have a pretty great soundtrack, mostly just because Eastbound and Down is a genuine banger that is part of the reason I was remembering this film recently, was because it came up on like a musical rotation, because it's just a genuinely good song that was written for this movie. But the rest of it is just sort of fast and loose, slapsticky comedy that doesn't seem to care much if you're coming along for the ride. It's mostly just saying, listen, here's where we're going. You can come along or not. And it definitely, I guess it comes together in a lot more than the sum of its parts. Because as I'm picking it apart, like, I don't want to forget that, like, I was having a decent, enjoyable time watching it. There's even some stuff in this film that, like, I don't know if it's a matter of the era or the area of the country, or specifically like trucker culture, that there's a bunch of like terminology they don't explain at all. They just sort of throw you into it very quickly at the very beginning of the film. They don't explain the beer issue at all. It's there's a lot that it doesn't explain. It doesn't seem to really care to. And it didn't prevent me from like understanding the film, but it gave some little hiccups right at the beginning where I'm like trying to pick up the film. I'm trying to go with the film, and I'm like, okay, what are we doing here? All right. It's weirdly charming. It's not great. It's definitely got some problematic elements. Sally Field's treatment and the treatment of women in general in the film is it's definitely the 70s. Although I will say there is a surprising amount of diversity shown with no acknowledgement in the film. There are a lot of black characters. I think there's a couple of Asian characters as well, and they're just there. They're just like, everybody's being like, they're business owners and other truck drivers and all these other things, and they're all just chummy. Everybody's like having a good time. Nobody, like, especially for the 70s, well, especially for the 70s, race could easily have been a point of issue. But even for the villains of this film, they make no point of like pointing themselves out as villains. Well, maybe there was one moment that one of them does, but like as using the race issue as a point of villainy. So like, I feel like the movie deserves acknowledgement for just having a bunch of like racial diversity that was not really very common for the 70s, even for the late 70s, and I appreciated that was there, especially because it would be really weird driving through like some of these parts of the rural South and seeing only white people. That would be kind of odd. So yeah, a particular point in its favor there. Yeah, I mean, would I come back and watch this again? Probably. It doesn't have a lot to offer, but it's just kind of charming, and I kind of enjoyed it. And as much of a mess as it is, it doesn't waste your time. Anyway, I could ramble on about this for a while longer. My brain is burnt out this week, so hopefully I'll be a little bit more put together next week. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your host, the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.